Great. Thank you. As Anton has already said, my name is Sasha, and I work together with him in Levsha, and thank you for inviting me. His announcement was not totally correct. There's not that I want to talk about versus, so fans versus professionals. Professional localization, the way how we know it, and what we discussed, it's only a part of my story. But fan localization, that's the second half, and they have the same goals. So they want to play games in their mother tongue, but two different roads take them to this goal. And so I don't want to talk about versus or antagonize them, but I want to say that the situation is quite complicated. And I will start with this situation, and then I will give you more details. So in the eyes of fan communities, of fan translators, professional localizers look like that they are like really slack off. And they say that they are just children of Google Translate, they are called overmind, or they say that they don't respect the games, communities, universes, especially if we are talking about some big franchises like Warhammer. And you can see these messages on the slide that many users, they write on forums and social media. So they write their disappointments. For example, I play only English just like to hear exactly what developers put into this game, even if original game was not English, but it was a third language, for example, Japanese. But we need to be fair, and here we are talking about games with serious narrative and a story, and very often these complaints, they are connected with like the need of people being literal, because sometimes I'm trying to use regular tricks for translation, but fans say that you don't respect the author, so you cannot step away too far. And sometimes we can understand this because there are many mistakes which were widely noticed, and you can see all the lists and videos how fans are complaining about professional localization. And then fans truly care. They believe that they are the only ones who can do it well. On the other hand, people in professional localization, they treat fans like amateurs who they are just too picky, or they nitpick, and like feature not a bug. So that's what I mentioned before. And also, they think that these are just people who don't know the language well enough. So the most interesting thing is that they are not saying that they don't understand some terminology or some all the nuances of the language, but they say that fans don't have even basic language skills or translation tradition. So those mistakes, which are like usually they are tracked and they are checked. Usually this is tracked in professional community, but nobody is correct in fans. And I found a funny picture on the forum of fan translators, and so they're discussing the fan translation of Little Red Riding Hood, and you can find some interesting approaches. So should we use Little Red Riding Hood? And so maybe we need to translate literally like красный капюшон. And so then there are many jokes that we need just to use English word Bremen town musician rather than actually translating it into Russian. Or another discussion is should we use бабушка, which is too sweet, babka, which is a little bit rude, or should we just use grandmother in Russian speech, which sounds really funny and about being very literal. Also, we need to be careful with so we need to be very careful to the original. For example, we cannot translate "How are you doing" as "How are you," which would sound a little bit different in Russian. We need to translate literally. So I've mentioned that, of course, I come from professional community, and I'm trying not to be critical too much and try to criticize only if I believe that that is something really big. And I would like to say that both professionals and fans, and not only about localization but developers, is that I believe that we can understand each other and learn something new. I will try to look into this from a more technical point of view. When we are talking about how we build localization processes. And so let's start with how it all started. So the history of professional localization we can divide into a few stages, even though like their borders are quite blurred. So pirate localization, traditional localization, and modern license localization. So pirate localization in the time of discs. So before we started to get official translation of games, and gamers, they wanted to play, and so the demand created supply. And there is a lot of discussion that just like they had 2 days to publish some games as soon as possible, and of course there were some terrible translations, but some translations were actually quite successful. For example, Fargus, they published pretty good auto-runs, and you could download them even at that time, and you could even use these patches and to change some games, and it was quite successful. Of course, pirates could not communicate with developers; they needed to rely on themselves. And they needed to know how to do it based on machine translation, their knowledge of development, about working with all the technical aspects. And as a result, there are many technical problems and problems with translation. Pirates were independent. They didn't need to follow any guidelines or marketing department of no glossary. And the result, of course, we got like some really legendary situations, so, for example, Kingpin, Life of Crime in Russian sounds like Lock, Stock and Smoking Barrels. Or Midtown Madness became Assholes versus Traffic Police. And of course, I don't want even to go into the area of machine translation. And also, they had extremely tight deadline, which led to really bad quality, because they had around a week. And those who did it first, they got 80% of all sales. So that's like not official statistics, but I just got the information from the person who was involved in this area at those times, and it looks like the right answer. The next stage, traditional localization. The first official localizations in Russia, we started to get somewhere closer to the end of the 20th century, and the process was pretty close to how the pirates worked. They got guidelines and glossaries, and they got reference materials. They had different level of cooperation with developers. Sometimes it was close cooperation, sometimes quite useless. And also there was additional level of quality control. And basically the games, like their policies of this, so of course if translations were bad, so they couldn't sell these games, so they were trying to control the quality more. And very often they published also like some discs in 2 languages, which meant that these discs could be bought in Russia, which was cheaper, and they could sell the discs in those countries where games were more expensive. For example, at that time there was localization of Warcraft 3, so where you need, and of course there were some folk tales about a really funny approach to localization of that game, and the translation of that game, that was extremely personal vision of the translator of that game, and of course now we don't have this type of level. So this area called traditional localization. So at this stage, we can say that everything was in one place, and localization engineers who prepared the materials and translations and editing final text, they were all working together and testing as well. Those companies which are following this approach of traditional localization, they still exist, but I think that they are dying out, and I think that our modern times, so of COVID time, it probably will finish this period forever, and those circumstances which we had at the end of 2000s, so we had a stable internet, which created better communication between developers and translators, and to work together, not just being completely separated in outsource approach. Also, technical tools were developed, and of course, digital distribution on all platforms for computer games, consoles, and mobile devices. And in 2007, the first part of Assassin's Creed was leaked before release, and it happened with English and Russian versions as well. And that was a kind of a big dividing point, because close cooperation with translators, and so this cooperation, it was the matter of safety. And this situation with this game, it showed that it's unsafe not to have really good cooperation. If you talk about modern localization, so it's really different. So engineers work mostly on the side of developers. So developers and publishers, they work with platforms. And or several parts. Testing of the translation, which are done by different teams, and stages of quality assurance, because the deadlines are quite tight, and some parts of the project
have very tight deadlines because it is integrated into the development process. So I've told you everything about professional localization, and now let's proceed to the fan localization, which existed in parallel to the professional localization. From legal point of view, it's not only closest to the pirate localization, but it's actually, in fact, is pirate localization, because the license doesn't allow for deconstructing of the original files. The market actively impacted professional localization, but everything is much easier with fan localization. That is why it is right now on the level of the first localizing attempts using machine translation. This is decomposition or deconstructing of the file. This is translation by a group of fans, embedding the translation by these amateurs. Then it is distributing this translation on forums and through different groups. In recent years, there are some discussions about monetization because some teams work by donations. But I think I won't be able to tell about it right now. Very often fans are not related to the translation industry. They just love the game or the universe, and they want to make their contribution into translation. Fun fact, Steam, which is still the largest gaming platform, 26% of these platforms were translated into Russian. That is why it comes as no surprise that translation innovations are not used by fans. They are quite difficult, they are quite cumbersome, and they are used for commercial use. And of course, they are not free. So people outside of the translation industry just know nothing about it, or they don't know what to start with. Sometimes fans also use CAD tools together with software developers, but MemoQ, as these fans have never seen these CAD tools, most often they would be lost. Of course, they can read documentation, they can find something for themselves, but this is a program which is, this is software which needs a lot of time to get used to. Sometimes a developer can crowdsource translation. This is exactly what happened with a Curious Expedition game, which was translated in Crowd-In, which was quite a friendly platform for beginners. That is why its web interface could include a lot of people. So everything depended on a concrete developer and whether they decided to work in this way. But in general, in the Russian-speaking world, one of the most popular solutions for translation is still Netabinoid service. It is now laying low because of the legal battle, but you can still get access to it if you have been registered and if some of the older users send you an invite. Recently, there were attempts to do voiceover by fans. This was possible thanks to the development of the internet and the different voiceover tools. A lot of fans, they also take part not only in subtitling or localization, but also in voiceover. They have a lot of skills combined. As for this amateur voiceover, it is more flexible than professional one because their work is not, it doesn't depend on professionals or developers of the game. As for the text, the recording studio can be an intermediary of this translation if they invite, if they call for translators, or probably they fans can localize or voice over official translations. So for some people, this is a way to professional career. In contrast to the translation, there are less people doing voiceover among fans because it is more cumbersome. It's a more difficult process, especially for young translators, for newcomers, because they think that translation is quite easy, but as for voiceover, it's much more difficult because at least you need to buy a good microphone, a high-quality microphone to get in touch with the team to do a test, and so on and so forth. Despite all the differences, fans and professionals have typical resources so that they build their workflow on. And now I would like to compare these resources. These resources is exactly what you see on your slide. These are professional skills, toolkit, human resources, and so on and so forth. The first aspect, these are professional skills, of course, and these skills are proved by tests, by experience, and work in real projects among professionals. Professionals have their strengths and weaknesses. As for the amateurs, their skills can be of different levels. Those teams who are united by unified goal, stronger participants can help the weaker ones. And because of the threshold of joining this industry might be lower, because those people who have more technical skills, they can help others. Good translators, if they can work in commercial translations, they don't usually do amateur translations for the reasons which are quite obvious. Second aspect, this is toolkit. For professional translations, these are translation memories, these are tools, very often these self-developed tools for amateur translators, for professional translators, and quality assurance tools. As for the fan translators, they don't use CAT tools. They often need manual editing and manual proofreading when they need to do a lot of manual work. But if they still have this manual work, editing and proofreading can take a long time. The next stage, the next aspect is human resources. As for the commercial companies, they have a pool of translators who work at all projects of the company. Sometimes they hire new translators for new projects, but they don't always have the resources to do that, and they don't always have the opportunity to engage ideal translators, editors, or proofreaders, especially when they need a team. And the result of these problems, these are different errors, technical errors, or lexical or stylistical errors. As for the fans, their resources are limited, but all members of the team are interested in the project and well know the project. Maybe there are some new additions to this team, but there is no official process of looking for these candidates. Next aspect, these are professional standards. As for professionals, they pay a lot of attention to sticking to traditions of translation, of editing or proofreading. Legal issues of copyright are also very important. This is what unites editors and managers. In every particular case, of course, the scope of work is very different. As for the fan localizations, translators gather a team for a particular project, and they develop standards according to this project. Irrespective of their translation skills, fans usually really love the game. They understand all the peculiarities of the game, so they have a higher level of ideological aspect. For example, some of them can defend the use of a particular letter in translation. Knowledge base. Knowledge base is very important for professional translators. It unites all the reference materials which they receive from the developers. This is description of the game, requirements of the client, documentation, guidelines, and practices which have been developed before. As for the amateurs, they usually work with the game which had already been released, so the knowledge base is more passive, but at the same time it might be more broad. It helps them overcome human factor. For example, when a professional translator forgets to ask a question. Fan teams can cooperate between each other and share important knowledge. So here you can see an example, wiki.xantex.com. This is a website which tells about different formats of files and ways of composing them. Another important aspect, this is these are different stages of the workflow. Professionals are usually very agile. They work with reference materials when they receive them. For example, new materials help them solve some of the issues which have been raised before. Human factor can also play a negative impact. Everything depends on the quality of management at all levels, from the developers team to the testers team. Everything is easier in the amateur community. Localization is one big stage which is controlled by the team. Well, I haven't seen all the fans' team work, but in general, those technical guys, they can suggest some new ways of structuring the process. But in general, this is quite a standard process. All the project is seen as one big stage. Quality assurance. As for the professional localization, testing is one of the most important stages of the process, taking into account the lack of high-quality translators. But the problem is often that testing is done by another team, and the translators sometimes don't have direct access to this team. This is one of the weakest stages of this process, because translators, they work differently. I don't really like this cliche, but I can say that translators are more like humanities more, and developers and testers are technical people. That is why they might have a lot of problems, and managers need to regulate them. Managers, in their turn, acting as judges, they also might commit mistakes, because not always they know the target language. In this case, in this area, amateurs work actually better than professionals, because, I mean, not better as a system, but because their approach is easier and more hands-on. They carry out quality assessment, which is controlled by the same people. Maybe it's not organized in a seamless way, but it doesn't require a lot of levels of control and a difficult system of communication. Deadlines. Professionals might have very tight deadlines, and very often they have adequate deadlines, though they don't always take into account the needs of all the team members in terms of communication or reference materials. Deadlines in amateur communities might have tighter deadlines, but as usual, they also work quite adequately. As for the will to work, professionals are interested in projects, and they are quite neutral when the project is not interesting. As for the human resources, a project might be composed of translators who are not really fans of a game, so who are not really interested. It doesn't mean that the translation will be good, but if the translator is excellent, sometimes they might commit mistakes because they do not play these games. As for the fans, they spend their own free time to take part in these projects, so usually they are interested in the results. Life can make its corrections in the process.
Cooperation with developers, that's a very important resource which professionals have, because sometimes it can be really closely connected, and high level of interest when everything is controlled to zero. But of course, for fans, there's always zero. So communication with communities, so that's pretty rare for professionals, and maybe opinion of communities can be taken into account, especially if a member of the community is inside the team. But usually, as special management, they understand that there will be always people who will be unhappy or disappointed. And because members of game communities or universes, they are quite outspoken if they don't like something. And fan translators, they are quite actively connected with communities. They are collecting feedback of other players, and usually if they're working well, they can increase their teams. For example, Arcane Coast, they are working in the area of role games, starting somewhere from 2000. Or also they old games school, so that's like the group of people, they're interested in some old games and they're interested in their localization. With those games never were translated into Russian even in the past. Especially when we're talking about games which were released not even in the 90s but in the 80s. And of course, assessment, professionals, so they usually get assessment from the community and the client. And the conditions of work, if they were difficult, if they had very tight deadlines, if there were some problems with communication, even if the result is quite average, it will still be accepted by the client. But only community can judge the quality of work of fans. And what I unfortunately forgot to mention, for communities, what was happening like inside professional community, that's unknown information. Because they sign a non-disclosure agreement, which usually is signed with all professionals in this area, and basically they cannot talk about anything about the project. But it's much easier for fans. I would like to talk about Dreamfair team, and so they were working with this game, which was released chapter by chapter, and the guys who worked there, so they were really working well, and they were officially recognized by the developers. So when players started to see the result of their work on Steam, and also I just recently found out that Cool Games, they released Russian voiceover based on their work. I would like to say a few words about the game itself. So that's a series of quests, long journey style. So they already released 2 parts, but then the 3rd part was developed by a new team. If first 2 parts they were localized for Russian market in the times of traditional localization, but Dreamfall Chapters, when they left their huge company, they decided not to order professional localization, but fans are quite active and they started to work on translation on their own. And they started to work together, starting with the first book, and they used the name of their team based on the robot, which you see in this picture. So 9 people who are working on translation. They stayed till the end of this project, and on the forum, and they also left out the form on the forum to invite new members, but only 1 person joined this way for the 2nd book. And there were some people who were working on the first book, but most of the team, they were still the same for all 3 books. As they used Notabinoid and Google Sheet, so because usually for games they used subtitle edit, because there are lots of subtitles for the game, and to use it as like for the best version. And mostly there were some dialogues and not many repetitions, so technical devices didn't help them that much. For testing, they used closed group in Contactor, where they published videos, and then they reported some bugs. Then they built a knowledge base that was a small guideline on style. That was about communication between characters, also minimizing vulgar language they didn't want to show the level of aggression because the language of aggression based on vulgar language used in English and Russian can be pretty different. They also use constructive criticism, and they announced it as one of the requirements to join the team, to be open to constructive criticism. And they also try to build the process this way to avoid toxic situation, and especially, of course, when we talk about volunteer work, that is very important. They also worked on textures, so which usually is not done in professional localization. And they also use it with work with text. If we are talking about some name of the shop, let's say, which the player sees as part of the game. So, for example, if this game is the name of this shop is too long, then they needed to change it. And usually this is something that professional localizers don't pay attention to. But here they also needed to work extra hard in this area. So they worked pretty hard. After every episode, they had about a month and a half to work on it. And I believe that that is a very important aspect to mention, because they were extremely motivated from the very beginning, and they managed to do it well. And probably that's why they were so successful, because taking it too long, if it's a volunteer project, it can have some negative consequences, because people will just get tired and they will not finish the project at all. Also, at some point, they got in contact with developers, and this communication was pretty simple. They wrote about the translation on the forum, and they sent the material, so they didn't have any commercial agreements. So they collected the team for every project, but this team didn't work on other games at the same time. It was very pleasant for me to play this game in Russian. I really like this series. I played it when I was really young, and I think that they were really systematic, and they followed all the steps that I described. So a lot of things in their working process looked a lot like professional process. And if we combine it with really fast work and high level of interest and motivation, it gave us really good result. And I would like to sum up, if I remember my experience both in fan and professional localization. So I believe that if the process is good and the will to organize the process well gives a good product and result. So fans usually don't have any problems with motivation and engagement, but they don't always understand all the processes right, and they don't always have very high level of language skills. But now, amateur communities or commercial companies, they are trying to talk about this. They write in their blogs and their social media. And for example, if we are talking about Levsha, so we are about to start a new course for students about translation and localization, and that's our input into this. Which means that for fans it will be much easier to start working as a fan if they get more information from us, and eventually they can become professionals in this area. On the other hand, professionals, they follow translation tradition, they keep up the high level of translation, but sometimes lack of engagement or interest at certain stage, it can create problems for everyone involved, including gamers. And so when localization moved into this modern era, sometimes they are quite tempted to just like to give all the work to some third party and not to be engaged. Some big clients, they don't try to do this, but it means that if the processes are built with a lot of parties involved, it means that human factor can still play some negative role in the work. And for this reason, we are trying to inform everybody about the process, about our work, and to make people more engaged. Because sometimes, of course, different teams, they might have different issues. For example, translators can worry a lot about translation, but at the same time, developers worry that the game doesn't launch at all. So, and they cannot really communicate or help each other. But this cooperation can help create really high-quality products, which will make everybody happy. Thank you very much for your attention. So these are my contacts. Please, you can ask any questions now, or you can always write me later using any of these channels. Sasha, thank you very much for your presentation. It was extremely interesting and super awesome. So I have a question, and of course we can ask our audience as well. Which game would you like to localize? For example, as a part of fan community. You want me to say a name? I don't know, you woke up one day and you thought, like, for example, dragons that... So something that is not in Russian yet and you would really like to work on. To be honest, when I start thinking about it, when I start this fan snobbish attitude, and I understand how the processes are built, probably I would choose one of my favorite games, which are already translated, and as a part of fan process, I would polish it and make it the way how I see it, because we have a lot. It's like a big part of our work that's a matter of taste, and so I would already choose the game which is officially translated, and I would make it better. And if we talk about official localization, Dragon Age maybe, and maybe Arcanum, because you mentioned about it. Because that's where my taste lies, and that's probably where I would like to work. And sometimes I also have some concern that if I come to this community having professional background, it can ruin the process, because they will think that, oh, this overmind tries to penetrate and ruin everything that we have, and he thinks that he is better than us and would like to teach us how to do things. But I believe the communication that's the key in any area of life. So maybe if I build the communication right, and I can do something awesome. I think this is the gold motto. So guys, communicate.
Do we have questions from the audience? Might happen when, for example, a translation studio asks a company asks the studio to translate the game. For example, I'm a fan of one game, and it's a pity that some of the games at the studio are only in English. Well, it really depends on the copyright holders. For example, developers might have a translation which has been done using PC, But on some platforms, they might not support this translation, this localization, because other companies distribute this translation on different platforms, and they don't have the rights. They only work with a particular region. So this is a question of the copyright holders. Fans can do something to solve that issue. For me, it's quite difficult to judge because I don't play console games. I don't really know how we can add the fan translation to Xbox and whether it can be done locally. But globally, I can say that it needs to be solved by contacting the copyright holder, and it might be quite a difficult process because of these legal aspects. I can add that Xbox 360 we found pirate versions of games with pirate translation or localization. So in general, I would like to say that it can be done unofficially. You can add, but as for the voiceover, most probably it's impossible. As for the Dreamfall, Red Trap Games, who developed this, this is an indie studio, but it's quite possible that when they released their game on consoles, they reallocated part of the money to Sony or to other copyright holders. That is why providing Sony or Microsoft with the fan translation, it might be a problem. Because of the differences in communication. Because of the contact with the marketing manager, and marketing managers don't know where to go next, or probably they're too busy, so this is a failure of communication. The problem here, I think, that because the ecosystem that we exist in are very different. We have different rules of the game, there are different people, different management levels, and good ideas might be lost, unfortunately. Thank you so much. Additional questions from the audience? Please tell us, is it normal to hire consultants who are experts in the universe of different games when translating a game? Is there sense in doing that? Consultants. Well, in general, I would say that in our work, when we have the opportunity, we try to hire a person who knows this universe, who knows a game as a translator, or probably if it is a specific topic such as arms, or probably military topic like helicopters or aircraft, we can ask a person who is interested in this particular topic to translate the game. Sometimes we have a request like that from a client. So the question is, we don't always find these people. But of course, if you have this opportunity, nobody will miss this opportunity, of course. Of course, fans do better in this area because they are subject matter experts. They do it the best they can if they know the details. Thank you. I hope that Sasha managed to answer your question. Any questions? So as far as I see, we don't have questions anymore. Okay, so Sasha, thank you so much for joining us. Your presentation was excellent because we managed to take a look at localization from different points of view. So thank you so much, Sasha. Have a nice day.